Good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Scottish Rugby Podcast, brought to you by the Scottish Rugby Blog. I am Cammy Black. We've got to do this. We'll get through it somehow. Scotland France review. We've got some good positive stuff to talk about first. But joining me this evening, we've got John Anderson. Good evening, John.
Good evening, guys. I was a little bit caught out there. I just remembered that these bottles are not going to open themselves, and we were just approaching the end of the credits, so the guys have just witnessed me do like a madcap dash to the kitchen and back. So if you just leave me out for like a minute while I catch my breath.
Were you going to get a bottle opener, or you were opening the bottles
I was going to get a bottle opener so that I'm ready. So I'm prepped. So I've got my bottle opener. We're sorted, right?
Right.
And we've got bottles there, out of sight, out of mind.
I thought you were like
that's just
pre-opening the bottles so that you didn't have to. You could
that would be pretty.
time.
Like, just get a straw and just like string them together in some sort of like. That, I mean, spectacular effort.
Hook you up to an IV. We need it tonight. We've also got Johnny McGinty. Good evening, Johnny.
Good evening. How are we doing? That's my voice, by the way, just about recovered from Saturday afternoon.
Yeah. We've got Craig Manson, fresh from his victorious triumph over Johnny, which we'll touch on later on. Good evening, Craig.
Good evening. How are we doing?
And we also have a very special guest this evening. We've got David from the Scrum of the Earth podcast. Good evening, David.
Hey, folks. How are you? Really great to be here. I hope you can hear me all right.
Yeah, we can hear you absolutely fine. You're far better dressed than any of us, David.
Well, I had planned to do just some traditional Scottish kit, but after Johnny on Blood and Mud, it just, the bar has been raised.
Yeah.
I'm glad you brought that up because Cammy barely even tried on Blood and Mud.
No, it's a podcast. it's a largely audio format, Johnny.
Dressed for podding.
Well, I told John if I ended up being late, I would just spritz some water in my face and say I just came from training.
Yeah, it's Johnny's normal excuse, isn't it?
I suggested it was only authentic if there was a protein shake as well.
But, yeah,
and you've got to have an ex-player's shorts hanging on your and
the wee sleeveless number as well.
Gun shield in the pocket.
Yeah.
The shorts are away just this week.
Johnny was one of the very first guests on my pod, so I'm really still very grateful to him. That was fantastic. I feel like I did a pretty meh job of it, so thank you for
it. Was good fun. I enjoyed it a lot.
Good stuff. Look, I don't think we've got. There's not much news, I don't think, unless I've missed something major. John's shaking his head. Good. I think
I've got a couple of things.
You've got a couple of things, Craig. There's been a couple of re-signings at Edinburgh.
Yeah, we've had Connor Boyle signed today. He's re-signed for again another whatever amount of time that the SRU won't tell us about. And also just a little thing that Edinburgh are donating £1 for every ticket sold to the Ukrainian relief fund, along with the actual team have come together and put 500 quid in as well. So they'll have £502 before any of you guys say anything.
I was ready as well.
Your cult's got more than two people in there. It's fine. You've got at least 7 now.
I've got at least 10 now. Yeah.
10? Jeez. I mean, is there like some sort of thing like once you get to a certain number of followers in a cult, you have to like declare for certain tax purposes? Is that how it works?
I'm going for. Sorry, on you go, John.
I was going to famously, churches are tax exempt, which is why in America they have the big mega churches.
The Church of Kinghorn.
I thought John was going to ask if there's some sort of cult loyalty card. Collect 7 members.
It's called the season ticket, Johnny.
Well, the Jehovah's Witnesses call it their Kingdom Hall. We could just call it the Kinghorn Hall.
Kinghorn Hall.
There you go, Craig.
David, you're welcome anytime you want to come along on this podcast.
That's already a better name than the damn health.
Yeah, exactly. I thought you were so going to go after the under-18s. I mean, I thought you'd be so desperate for a victory, Craig, given that you've lost, 20 in a row now, that you were going to go for the Edinburgh victory in the under-18s fixture versus Glasgow.
I wondered where you were going when you started talking about me going for the under-18s. I was like, whoa, John, take it easy, boy.
It's not Patreon yet, son.
Okay. As John has mentioned, we have a Patreon, which is patreon.com/Scottish Rugby Podcast, where you can sign up for £3 a month and you get a bonus weekly podcast where we let loose a little bit more. We do hands in the ruck. We have a bit of a swear, a bit of a giggle. Whereas what in the main podcast, what we tend to do is we kind of talk about the games that have been on that particular week and catch up with any news. So if you want extra bonus weekly podcasts, then sign up to the Patreon. If you're watching this live, we're on YouTube, Twitter, and Twitch at the moment. You can download the podcast on audio format on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Alexa, anywhere else that you can get a hold of podcasts. We'll be there in audio format as well. I wanted to start with the positive news from this weekend. And Craig, I'll start with you. Scotland, Colombia. What a fantastic moment for Scottish rugby that was.
Really, it's as far as I'm concerned, we need to start putting our hands in our pockets at the SRU and start paying these women some decent money. What a fantastic result. Absolutely. Okay, fair enough. I'm not going to say that Colombia, it was going to be a difficult game, but it was one of those games that almost like us going to go down to the I was going to call it the Millennium, but the Principality, and thinking that we were going to win against Wales. It was we were just being very careful and saying, well, it's going to be a tough game, but it was a fantastic game against Colombia. You could watch Scotland women go through their processes, go through their different different plays, and it was fabulous. And what a great result! And looking forward to the World Cup now.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny, Craig said that it's Colombia. They obviously were expecting the win for Scotland, but it's hard, I think, in women's rugby because we don't. The teams in the top 20 don't play each other as regularly as say in the men's team, so it's kind of hard to get a gauge on where everybody is in the world. And certainly, we saw Scotland against Japan earlier this year. They have a tendency when they're winning games to maybe drop off. So it was quite a kind of clinical finish to the game to kind of see it out in that way and be absolutely ruthless.
It was, yeah. And obviously when it's hard enough to watch women's rugby anyway, I'm not going to profess to have ever seen or known anything about Colombia women's rugby other than I knew that they were playing for the same spot in the World Cup as we were. So although, Scotland had every right to feel comfortable, Colombia had got themselves just as far in World Cup qualified as Scotland had. So what Craig says is right. They were absolutely right to say, be really careful, say this is going to be a tough game, blah, 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 blah. But once they got started, they didn't let up at all, which was great. Really good to see.
And Judy Murray now, John, calling for women's rugby to go fully pro. So it's the word is spreading.
Exactly. I mean, hopefully Judy Murray has more success with getting women's rugby to have some element of professionalism than she has with her campaigning to get tennis to be Scotland's national sport, because it's we've definitely not managed that yet.
Have you seen what happens to clay courts in the rain?
That's an entire Monty Python episode about the Blancmanges come down and intend to win Wimbledon, so they just turn them all into Scotsmen.
Yes, no, it's good to see, like high profile people. Like, to be fair, right, Judy Murray should already have been speaking up for Scottish rugby. I know that this is what we talked about in the pod a wee while ago about almost qualifying for this World Cup is a watershed moment for women's rugby in Scotland, because it's now got that platform, it's got that almost that badge attached to it. It was the same with the football a few years ago. There's a badge attached to it. We are at a World Cup. Therefore, people like Judy will speak up. You'll get, you've got Nicola Sturgeon tweeting it. You've got all the kind of support, and it just drives that interaction. So it's great, and I think we were in a situation where we were probably all quietly confident we were going to beat Colombia, but just to get that achievement, to get there, actually, when you think about some of the wins that came during the campaign, to actually get to that position, just a phenomenal achievement, and they should all be incredibly proud of themselves.
Yeah, David, I'm kind of curious. Women's rugby is supposed to be the fastest growing section of the sport. How is it viewed in America? Because I'm looking at the rankings and I'm surprised to see the USA Eagles. I think they're called down in 18th.
Yeah, no, I'm not surprised. People here don't know what rugby is. So so if you told them there was actually men's rugby and women's rugby, that would just be more of a head scratcher, I'm afraid. So, somehow we've become very aware of sevens. People are loving the sevens. And I think the women's sevens, too, have really captured people's imagination for sure.
Yeah, it's the gateway rugby. I keep talking. I keep trying to. It's the way in.
It's confusing though because it's the least like American football because it's faster. It's like,
I think
Don't
that
be
might.
bad with American football, John.
Yeah, I think that might be why too. I think people who are used to watching the NFL, when you say, "Hey, watch this rugby game," they're like, "I don't know what they're doing. It's too close, but it's not the same." I feel like you want to be farther away from the NFL.
maybe, yeah.
So we're pleased with that. We'll keep an eye on how things are going. It's not a great group that Scotland are in, but we'll see. It'll be an experience.
We made it.
I think we used to talk about it when we were in Division 1 with the How Harlequins, and we used to get put, because we're in fourth, we would get put in with the Prem teams for the cup, and a lot of people would turn and go, "Oh, that's going to be a difficult issue." No, that's why you want to push. You want to push to play these teams. You want to see where you are. So no, for me, yes, it'll be a difficult group, but it's our first World Cup, and it'll give them a real chance to show themselves against these strong teams.
It's what we've talked about throughout, Craig, isn't it? About you only learn from playing the best and being in that group, being exposed to that level. Obviously they get that in the Six Nations with England every year, and you see the progress the players are making. Things, if you're playing Colombia every week, you don't progress. Put it that way. Yeah. So you have to be playing the best.
Well, they always say steel sharpens steel, which is why my USA Eagles were so clever to let New Zealand blow us out by 95 points, because that really blunted that instrument right away, and they haven't been good since. Mission accomplished.
We've got a comment actually. Callum on Twitch says American women's rugby are very good on TikTok. Good to see more of the Scots on there too. Need to get dancing, boys. I don't think we'll be.
Finn,
don't be doing. Finn might be dancing. I don't think any of us will be dancing on TikTok.
If Finn wants to dance, I'll dance. We'll make it happen.
Fine.
Dance off.
I'll rap your welcome, and you and Finn can dance.
There's lots of good stuff. What I would say is there is lots of good rugby stuff happening on TikTok. And I saw somebody, I can't remember who it was. I think it was some old white rugby journalist was moaning about it. It might be my hands in the ruck later, but I was like, it's a young person's thing. You're not going to attract young people to watch rugby by having more old white men talking about it. I say in a podcast.
I feel attacked.
Are you calling me old, Cameron?
You're younger than me, John. Look, we're on Twitch. Look, what more do people want?
I'm the youngest in the room. That's all I'm saying, guys.
Anna also says the MLR seems to be doing good things with rugby in the USA. If by good you mean making Dougie Fife look like a world-class player, then yeah.
Free Dougie.
Yeah. I still don't. I know. I said this on the Blood and Mud podcast. And never in all my days did I think I would see Adam Ash sharing a stage with Fat Man Scoop, and yet the MLR delivered that.
There's so many things the MLR are going to deliver over the next wee while. I'm quite excited to see what's going to come next.
I love MLR. It's brilliant,
yeah.
And you can watch it all for free as well.
Mm-hmm.
Is it kind of? There's a lot of people over here, and I'll be honest, they're rugby geeks. Let's not beat about the bush. Who are massively into MLR, and some of the stash is outrageous, especially the Ella Giltini stuff is just beautiful.
Well, funny you should mention Anna, because she's going to LA quite soon and bringing me back some Giltini stuff.
Oh.
How much is it kind of penetrating over there then, David? Are people becoming more aware of it, or is it just kind of a slight curiosity at the minute?
It feels like mostly a slight curiosity, but there's definitely more curiosity and more people expressing that curiosity for sure. This season feels a lot different. This feels like we graduated in some ways. The squads are deeper. My own Free Jacks, we could basically put together 2 23-man groups and have them fighting it out in training, and but it's a lot more Americans too, not so many, retired people from the Prem and from Australia and stuff like that. So I think, I'm optimistic. I think it's going to be a while. I interviewed a guy, Ollie Engelhart, recently, and I asked him, what is the answer? If I had an unlimited amount of money, could I make MLR huge? And he was like, no, because it's not in the schools yet. You're not playing it at middle school. You're not playing it in high school. Some people are, but it's incredibly rare. So they're doing this whole initiative where if you just get in touch with them, they'll send a bag of rugby balls to your school and then send a couple of coaches and players and just show up and do a training session with you if you want. Like, they're really trying to get into the grassroots, which I think is probably the silver bullet.
Yeah. God, they only started doing that in Scotland about 2 years ago.
Yeah, we could actually still be doing with some of that.
I was going to say, try and get a group from Glasgow or from Edinburgh to come out into the middle. I can't even think of the middle of Dundee to go and see rugby.
If you're in a school in Fife and you phone up and say, "Oh, I'd really love to do some rugby in my school," you get me.
Yeah, we'd take it.
Schools in there, you get Matt Gittle.
You are the Fife equivalent of Matt Gittle, weren't you?
Jeremy McGinty, Fife, Matt Gittle.
Elaborate, Craig, elaborate.
He's not actually a Fifer, but he's trying to get Fife citizenship, and I'm not letting him.
You're thinking of Quade Cooper.
Yeah, I know.
Plays every possession, is a tad flaky and misses kicks when it's crucial.
That's all right. Yeah, those are all correct. Yeah.
Okay, we've delayed long enough. We're reaching 20 minutes in, and I think it's probably time to talk about Scotland France, if we must.
Okay, thanks, you guys. See you later.
John, I'll start with you, just because on the screen you're next to me, and I'll move around in a clockwise direction because it makes some sort of sense. I came away from that initially. My initial thought was, do you know what? France are amazing. We weren't that bad. This is just our place in the world, and we're going to be competitive. But when we come up against teams like France, who are on top of the game, and the All Blacks, and even arguably teams like England, we haven't got a hope in hell because we just haven't got the depth and the funding and all of that nonsense. And then I watched the game back again, and I thought, oh no, we were rubbish. So where have you kind of fallen on this?
I watched the game twice. Right, so I probably almost had the opposite response first time round, where actually I didn't. So I don't believe France were that good. Right, France are a great team, best team in the world. I don't think they needed to be that good against Scotland because we made it easy for them. We made so many mistakes, so many errors. Tactically, we looked. For me, it was. I don't want to say it was like so. The Wales game was such a backward step, right? And what we really needed this week was a reaction to that at home to say, look, that was an anomaly. We got that wrong. Let's put it behind us. Let's move on. France were clinical. They took their opportunities when necessary. Their breakdown work was they interpreted the referee better. Let's put it that way. Scotland were, for the most part, pretty stupid in their decision making and made it easy for France. So I said on another podcast, well, actually, me and Craig were on the other night, that I don't think France were as good as people are making out, and I don't think Scotland were nearly as plucky underdogs as people are making out either. I think Scotland were actually pretty rubbish and made a lot of mistakes.
It was weird, Johnny. I was watching Squidge's kind of review today, and I hadn't clicked at the time, but he was right. Scotland kicked 3% of ball at the weekend, which is just, it's like the game plan was thrown out the window, and I can't decide whether that was a decision made on the pitch by the players or whether they'd suddenly decided they'd scored that one try through phases with Darcy Graham and decided that was going to happen every week now.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a really weird one. I can't get my head around what they think they're doing. To be honest, I cannot shake this feeling that there's complacency coming in. And as much as a lot of people within Scottish rugby fans and media wise over the last couple of weeks have tried really hard not to be too hype that there are players in the Scotland camp that are believing the hype anyway, even though it doesn't really exist. If that makes sense.
Yep.
And I think like this is why my thing is for the very minimum, Adam Hastings should be in camp by now. I think people who can challenge in positions where these let's be honest, outside of Chris Harris, the Lions in the back line, I think are still great players. Don't get me wrong, I have to caveat this by saying not only are they some of our best players right now, they might be some of our best players ever. But they just seem to be off the boil and a bit complacent, and they've had that great win against England, and they've been building and building and getting better and better. They've all been away on a Lions tour, and now they're like, oh, that's fine, we've completed rugby. And there is Blair Kinghorn in camp. And I don't have a problem with the Blair Kinghorn experiment. I'm all for it. But it is an experiment, and he is the only option. So there's no Adam Hastings, there's no Ross Thompson, there's no other options at fullback, there's very few other options on the wing. So the guys in there are just like, oh, it's fine, we do what we want, there's nobody here to replace us. And I think that needs to be shaken up a little bit. Just to sort of, people need to be made a bit uncomfortable, I think.
Yeah. I think that's, Craig, what's your take on that? I mean, certainly I think we said after the Wales game, actually, that it was, it's Hogg and Russell, to me, either seem to be complacent or have a sense that they are so important to the team that they have to do everything themselves.
Yeah, and that, we've been banging this drum for the last couple of weeks, Cammy. My take on it, where I felt we were positive on the weekend was actually everyone was telling us that the French forwards are going to come and absolutely smash everyone to pieces, and I didn't think we actually had that problem. I think our forwards, apart from realising that the French are holding Cameron Wokey up for a little while longer than normal. Yeah, okay, they've done it once. No, they're going to do it twice. Okay, this is the third time. Right, okay, this is the fourth time. Maybe we could learn something here. I think that did my head in. But for most of the time, we were doing quite well in the forwards. And if you have a look at it, I have got a point here. I'm bringing it back round to what Johnny's just said. If you look at the most competition we have at this moment in time for places is in the forwards.
Yeah,
because we have people within the forward group and within the squad who can just drop in and out, and we will get a very, very similar level of play.
Yeah. David, how was it kind of for you watching this kind of slightly dispassionately, I guess? What was your take on Scotland's performance?
Yeah, I was not feeling dispassionate about it. It was one of the hardest matches I've ever watched, I think. It so early did it feel like there's just no shot, and then you just sit there and wait and watch the score increase and increase, and the comms were falling over themselves in their rush to just pour dirt on Scotland. It was like, get out of the way, I have something else negative to say about them. No, my turn. It made it so much worse. We got smacked by a blizzard again on the Friday night before. So I used my technique of, okay, at halftime, I'm going to go out and just take out my anger on the snow in my driveway. And then I came back in and it was even worse. So that completely backfired. The quote I wrote down at the time was, I don't know how I stumbled across it, but a Yeats quote that, now that my ladder's gone, I must lie down where all the ladders start, in the foul rag and bone shop of the heart. And that was pretty much how I felt at the end of that. So...
the classiest thing that's ever been said in this podcast. Right there, in a nutshell. 190 odd episodes in, someone has finally made a quote.
Well, that 14-point swing, it looked like we were going to get a try late in the first half. There's Doohan's getting involved. Chris Harris is doing Chris Harris things. Then there's that pass that just goes off digits from Hoggy. I still don't know. Was that an errant pass? Was that bad by Stewie? Was it a combination? What happened there?
Yeah. Rumours, of course, that Chris Harris obviously failed his HIA at halftime, and there's he was
passing it to the wrong of the two stewards. He was saying,
we laugh, but it wasn't that bad a pass. Actually.
It was a good pass. It was just one of the ones where the option, Hogg had so much field in front of them that actually, I know it's the heat and the pressure of the game,
Yep.
but that in itself is an issue. I think particularly with Hogg at the minute is in his decision making. I think as well to an extent with Russell is for whatever reason they're both struggling to make decisions under pressure. Because one option there for Hogg is he had so much park in front of him and other players with him was to let it drop and bounce and pick it up on the bounce.
Yep.
If he was rather than stretching for it, but there was an element of desperation there, John. And I think the other thing Hogg was doing, particularly when in the second half, and we talked about this about the Wales game, is just like running into big piles of players, running beyond the gain line and getting isolated and sealed off. And it's you would have thought they would have resolved that after the Wales game, and it's a bit concerning that they haven't.
I mean, you would have thought they would have resolved that 2 years ago as well. But Hogg has been consistently doing this for about 2 years, and it is really frustrating. And the only reason we've gotten away with it, and I said it last time out in the pod, and I'll say it again, the only reason we get away with Hogg being a glory hunter, is it glory hunting? Is it I can do it all myself? I don't know. The only reason we get away with it sometimes is Jamie Ritchie. Jamie Ritchie is the absolute linchpin of this Scotland team. He is what counters the Stuart Hoggness, which is I'm going to put it under my jumper and run, and I'm going to skin everybody. And when you get engulfed, because you just can't do that at international rugby, when you get smashed by French forwards, and no disrespect to obviously no disrespect to the back row, but they're no Jamie Ritchie. One of them might be even better than Jamie Ritchie. Let's see, but Jamie Ritchie's irreplaceable at the moment, right?
Yeah,
his skill set is irreplaceable. Russell, on the other hand, I think there's two different stories here. Hogg trying too hard. Russell doesn't look happy again. It doesn't look himself, and it'll be interesting to see what comes of that, because he just does not look himself. He doesn't look happy with what they're doing, and I would hazard yet again that if we had Sam Johnson outside him, we would have played a lot better.
Okay, Johnny, on that, are Finn Russell and Stuart Hogg droppable? Has Gregor Townsend got it in him to drop one or both of them, even if it's for the Italy game?
This is the thing that confuses me. 2 years ago, he dropped Finn for an entire tournament for having one too many beers. And now he seems to have completely bottled that as an option entirely. I don't understand. Like, I would love to know what Adam Hastings has done, because it must be something horrendous.
John and I were speculating it's the haircut he got when he went to Gloucester. It's just no longer acceptable.
To me, I don't even necessarily think that they have to be dropped for a game. But what I think really, really needs to happen again is that the spectre of them being dropped has to be there. Because if you look at the squad at the moment, it's not possible to drop them. So you need to at least make them think that they might get dropped. Because at the moment, they're right. I mean, they're two of Scotland's best ever players, and they think that we need them, and no matter what happens, we'll always need them, and that's the way it is. So they need to at least have the idea put to them that actually we maybe would do it without them for a game or two, until they get their heads together and think, right, okay, well, we need to actually knuckle down here.
Well, the pair of them obviously can't get dropped, because the only guy that can replace the both of them is Blair Kinghorn. And even Richie Vernon could play two positions at once, but Blair certainly can't.
I'm going to come on to Blair. I'm going to come on to Blair Kinghorn later, Craig. Don't worry. Craig's just sat there stoically and silently. I'm not sure whether he's frozen.
That wasn't a criticism. That was not a criticism.
Of course, it's a criticism.
I was simply saying no.
You just said that Richie Vernon could do.
Could play both. Could play more than one position. Blair Kinghorn is either a 10 or a 15. I'm saying he can't play them both at the same time. He can't physically be on the park and play them at the same time. That wasn't a criticism.
He came onto the park, at 55, 60 minutes, and actually got us a try. More than what Hogg, more than what Finn did on the day. And what I would probably say is that, and I'm parking Blair Kinghorn because I can feel the air growing out of here like that, wanting to kill everybody. I think, as far as I'm concerned, if I was looking at next week, I'd start Blair Kinghorn at 15, drop Hogg, and then you've got the ability to move Blair into 10 if Finn continues his rubbish, and bring Hogg on for the last 20 minutes. And I think you can still captain from there. You can still be the club captain from the bench, and it just gives them a wee wake up call. Because as far as I'm concerned, I think Ali Price, I think Finn Russell, and I think Stuart Hogg need to, just as everyone has said, need to have a wee look at themselves, and think what are, because they're the linchpins. They're the people that everyone's looking to. They're the people that are saying, what are we? The forwards are rumbling and rumbling and rumbling. But, they're the playmakers. They're the ones that are supposed to, be taking us to this next World Cup,
It's interesting, David, interesting on your takes. We've talked not endlessly about Stuart Hogg at captain, and we swung both ways from fullback shouldn't be captain, and Johnny, you've had your time on that. I'm not coming back to you on that. So all the way up to do you know what? He's not a bad captain, and actually this kind of makes sense. And it felt like at the weekend that Scotland almost kind of encapsulated the way that Stuart Hogg plays in a way that was like almost like a Stuart Hogg performance across 15 players. So is it? I'm just I put it out to you. Do you think Stuart Hogg's the man to captain Scotland, or do they need to look elsewhere?
I still think well, I talked to John about this too a little bit, and you guys have talked about it a lot, obviously. Should the 15 ever be the captain? Just the amount of field he's got to cover. I understand it's difficult. I thought he did a pretty good job of that this weekend, I guess. But, the thing you said about him trying to do too much, I think, like what you said about him not fielding that pass or maybe giving it a chance to just bounce and go to somebody else, all those things are indicative of somebody who is trying to do too much. And I wonder if Johnny's idea of sort of the threat of dropping might do something to light a fire. Like Exeter dropped him right when the season was getting right to the end. They dropped him and were unceremonious about it, and it worked. So, is that better for him? He seemed like he came back with a fire after that, maybe. But it's like you can't do it against Italy because then it's just like, yeah. We're not too worried anyways. So it would have to be, I don't know, Ireland or something. But then I would just be crapping myself leading up to it even more. So,
but the thing is, David, you're forgetting the elephant in the room, and that is the Scottish rugby fans. If we drop Hoggy or we drop Finn for Italy and we get beat, then it's all Tooney's fault, and Hoggy should have been there and Finn should have been there. So I guess it's one of those situations where you've got more of a chance, I suppose, with Italy that we can play without one of them and see what's going to happen. But I'm very concerned about the Italy game. That's for sure.
I'm more concerned about Finn. I think Finn should definitely not be dropped. I don't see a better option than him, and I think he's playing really well, but not sensationally. So I think that's probably our best option. But yeah, Stuart is he's a conundrum right now.
Yeah,
my big worry for Italy.
Just Craig criticised Scotland rugby fans before I did.
And I know you've got that as your hands in the ruck again, John.
I'm just saying Craig done it first.
Well, if I remember correctly,
I don't have a notebook, a ledger down here, kind of writing it all down. Who's got in first?
That's your fault.
I've got a black book. Don't worry about it.
I've got a notepad here as well.
I heard you criticising Scottish rugby fans on Scrum of the Earth as well, John. So it just follows you around the world, mate.
It does. Well, that's.
Everyone's got to have a thing.
I wonder if people think I sit here kind of trying to count up the Ember and the Glasgow digs and making sure we get balance.
Do you not?
I think to do my time. My big worry about the Italy game for me is that I don't think it's an opportunity to solve a lot of problems, but I don't think they'll take it. I think what I wonder is that we've got this new attack coach that's coming. And I wonder how much of this game planning is down to him thinking that we're a team that can go through phases and run phases and somehow build possession, John, and actually we may well do that against Italy and come away with a reasonable, decent win, and then go and get absolutely pumped by Ireland because we haven't solved anything.
Yeah, it does. It does seem like we're in a situation again. I think almost like the changing the coaches has been an interesting one, and obviously the positive impact Steve Tandy almost instantly had on that defence spoke to defence that. Well, I mean, no disrespect, but well, absolute disrespect. The defence was in disarray when he came in, so anything was progress. And he actually made an amazing job of really organising that defence. And obviously, this weekend's the first time we've really, really taken a bit of a scudding off someone. You then look at the attack. He's almost coming into position where we were good anyway, and it is almost like we've kind of regressed. We're doing a lot more through the kind of 13 channel, and we're kind of trying to rely on Chris Harris as an attacking threat when he isn't that player. He's got attacking threat, that's fine, but he's not that threat. He's not that playmaker at 13, and he's not the guy to make that crucial decision. So it does seem like we've maybe got our tactics a wee bit off, but I would probably counter that by saying you can have the best tactics in the world, but when you've got individually experienced playmakers like Russell, like Hogg, kicking ball out on full, making individual errors, then you're always going to struggle. And we really haven't helped ourselves. So I think the coaching team, they'll look at their role in it, but for me, it's individual errors throughout.
Well, I mean, Johnny, you were there, and it's always interesting, I think, when you're at a game, because you kind of see, you get a much wider perspective of how everybody's lining up and the patterns that they're trying to run. What was there a sense, kind of watching in the stadium, that there was a shape to Scotland's attack?
Yeah, I mean, I could see what they were trying to do, but it might have just been one of those days where another day that pass from Harris comes off to Hoggy and Hoggy scores, and then that changes the face of the entire game. It is little things like that, but you did get the impression again, and I don't want to be like bodying him the whole time, because once again he is a phenomenal player and he's one of our most important players. But when Hoggy's trying to push it like that, things just seem to not happen. Like, you can have the best attack plan in the world, but if Hoggy's trying to force it through and it's not quite on, it starts to come apart, and it comes apart pretty quick, because there's something about him where if something's not coming off, then what happens is, rather like, because everyone gets right into Finn, because if something doesn't come off for Finn, he kind of like smiles and shrugs and gets on with it. Whereas if it doesn't come off for Hoggy, he tries it a little bit harder the next time, and then a little bit harder the next time, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and it piles on and piles on. So I think he needs to just relax a little bit.
He has to be more Finn. And
exactly.
But according to Scotland fans, Finn has to be more Hogg. So we then get stuck in the perpetual loop of, I mean, Hoggle, where we end up just like everybody, self-doubt is perpetuating everywhere.
There was a really interesting, it was Fraser Brown, I think, was on the BBC Scottish Rugby podcast, saying that Finn Russell had told him that he played in a Racing 92 game, and he came off the park and he was absolutely exhausted. And his forwards were saying, you'd hardly run. It was all through us today. And it was against Saracens, actually, one of the games he played against Saracens. And he said he was just mentally exhausted because he was constantly trying to work out where the space was and trying to analyze the match on the floor. And I wonder, Craig, whether there's a bit of that going on with Finn at the minute, that he's, for all the shrugs and the smiles and, the kind of, the happy-go-lucky facade we're getting, is it that he's tiring himself out, but maybe underneath it all, he's overthinking things?
Well, I think I think you're right about the overthinking, but I think the overthinking is because he's emptied his box of tricks. And I think the defences nowadays that he's going up against know what's coming out of him. They know that there's going to be a kick through. They know there's going to be a kick over, chip over. They know that there's going to be a cross-field kick. And so they're shutting them down a little bit quicker, and it's definitely what happened with France. And it was, and on my side of things, I definitely think it was what was happening with Wales, and they were expecting what he's going to do. And okay, we all have a laugh and we'll talk about Finn doesn't even know what Finn's going to do next. But I actually think that defences are getting wise to him now. They've seen enough of Finn Russell to understand what's going on, and I think they're shutting him down. So he's now having to force a kick or force to play a little bit, and he's hitting bodies, he's hitting feet instead of it's not coming off. So maybe there is a time for us to, because we get into this whole argument about, we must bring Hastings up. Hastings must come in and have a go. But with Hastings, and we've talked about this many times, or I have anyway, Hastings is just replicating Finn Russell, to a poorer extent, to be perfectly honest. So what do we do? And that's the question. And I think what we do have missing at 12 is we have that second playmaker missing at the moment. And we're getting Tuipulotu was good, but he wasn't. I don't think he was he's not the kryptonite of France. He wasn't someone that's.
He's not the answer at 12. He really isn't the answer at 12 so. for the way Scotland play. Just look through the annals of Scottish rugby. When has Finn Russell played his best rugby for Scotland with a second distributor at 12? Basically, with
Pete Horne outside him. Yeah,
with Pete Horne at 12. That's when he's played his best rugby with Scotland. He plays well with Sam Johnson. They link up well together. Sam Johnson has an underrated distribution game. He's saw as this bulldozing 12 who's very good in defence, but he has a great passing game, a great range of passing, and also picks wonderful lines. I would probably take your point around Hastings, Craig. I agree. There's to an certain extent we've talked about the whole replication thing. I don't think that's necessarily a bad thing. I think Finn could use a week off because I think he's played so much rugby. Yeah. He obviously came back from the Lions tour. Was injured on the Lions tour. We don't know to what extent that injury has cleared up. We don't know if we're literally counting down to the summer to have a wee bit of surgery on that Achilles injury. There's all sorts of things at play that we don't know about as not pundits, as supporters who are speculating. He just doesn't look a man who's comfortable in his own skin at the moment. And if we compare Finn Russell at the weekend to Finn Russell and the Lions tour coming on after 10 minutes and winking at people and smiling and laughing, they're very different people, and it doesn't sit right for me. So yeah. I think I would speculate he's getting an injury and it's getting managed. That would be my guess.
David, I'm interested in your take on something Craig said, and it's about defences and teams starting to prepare for Finn Russell. And I guess it's a problem for Scotland as a whole now, is that in the past teams maybe haven't prepared for Scotland. It's been, here's Scotland, they might surprise us, but chances are they won't, and we'll probably win. So we'll just go with our own game plan. But I think definitely at the weekend you could see that France had analysed every man 1 to 15. They've not 1 to 20, one right through to 23 on the bench as well. And knew what was coming in and nullified the threat all the way through. Even the likes of Chris Harris, they knew what was coming with him.
Well, I think at the international level, especially, there's a lot more complexity on just game plans, both on offense and defense. I think France are very serious about that right now. I think they wanted to send a message, and I think they did. I found a silly stat too, which was so Fabien Galtier has only been there since 2020, or he was anointed the successor in 2020, but he didn't coach a game against us until 2021. Lost that, beat us, but that was in an Autumn International, and then lost again to us last year. Sorry for the noise in the background. There's work being done, but so until Saturday, France had never beaten Scotland in the Fabien Galtier era. But I that reminds me of like the typical NFL stats where it's like, well, the Cleveland Browns have never beaten the Green Bay Packers in January away. It's like, well, they've done that 3 times. So
Very few people beat the Packers in January, just for the record.
that is true. Only Aaron Rodgers has that power.
That's why we did go into the game at the weekend with such confidence as well, because we have had a good record against France, and our game, the way it has, even looking at that Wales game, which actually for me has now, there's been a light shone on how bad we were. That Welsh team are desperate, and we absolutely and utterly made a plat of it. And we still only lost by 3, and that kind of papered over a lot of the cracks. France, that defeat to France has been coming for Scotland. That kind of, the way we've been playing since the autumn, that kind of slapping about that we got off them has been coming. So really, we said last week, the Wales game, that's the wake up call. It's time to really show a reaction. This is now like that. This for me is the absolute, like, we can't not react to this now.
But no. The thing is, though, and what we are talking around a little bit here is the fact that France came full noise, and
yes.
And we from where we were sitting, apart from arguing with the guys that were getting up to go for a pee on a regular basis, we could you could see the patterns that France are playing, and we talked about it last night, John.
Yeah, we did.
The ruck protection was phenomenal. The ball presentation was phenomenal, and the ruck speed with Antoine Dupont was absolutely phenomenal. And when you've especially in the second half, when you've not got Chris Harris there, our defence just looked at sea. And so some of the okay, fair enough. That Pinot try where he just plucked the ball out of the air and landed, that just amazing stuff. But it was full noise, and so don't get me wrong. I think we are just as good as or we could have beaten France if we'd got on in the first half, if everything had come off in the first half and put some pressure on them. But they absolutely phenomenal on the weekend.
Does it mean
for me? Sorry, John. I think
it's
really gone to sort of to 3 tiers now for the rest of this year's tournament, because there's France and Ireland, and there's a gap, and it's not a small gap, and then there's us, Wales, and England, and then another possibly even bigger gap before Italy underneath, and that really showed itself. I think that it was starting to bubble at the second round of games. It really showed itself this weekend. Like those two, France and Ireland, are a good deal ahead of everybody else.
It just kind of jumped out to me that, like, we've talked about beating France, and David's point is absolutely valid. We've had such a good record against France, but look at the progress France have made versus where we are. Right? Okay, yeah, you're talking about back-to-back World Cup winning under 20s teams coming through the French system, but we genuinely believed we were the equal of that side and could win, and a lot of Scottish fans said that at home. And you're now looking at a side. So, like, does this? I think your point right at the start, Cammy, is does this put us in our place where you're looking at a French side that could go and win a World Cup versus a Scottish team that may not get out the group stage?
But, and this is on the rewatch, because yes, that's how I felt after the game. 100% felt okay. There's where we are. We're top 8, right? And we can be anywhere between 5th and 8th, and we found our level.
Yeah.
And sometimes we'll give 1 to 4 a bit of a scare and maybe turn them over. On rewatching it, there's something not right with this Scotland team, and there were so many points that Scotland left out in the park and opportunities left out in the park, and you can't. I think it's really hard, but especially with rugby, is a game that it's different. I think with football, you can maybe say, well, the other team still would have scored the goals, and they probably would do. With football, rugby's different because it's a momentum game. And you look at the times when Scotland missed the chance, and there's an opportunity there for a massive momentum swing. I mean, we go in, at half time, with the other try, that was, and it's different. But France run up the other end and they scored just before half time.
David called it. It's the 14-point swing.
It's that exactly. So that goes the other way, and we go in at half time in a much better position. Chance to regroup, chance to look at things. There were a lot of errors from Scotland at the weekend, and part of that's the pressure from. We got to credit France. France put Scotland under a lot of pressure, but I think Craig's point, which is interesting, and kind of what everyone was worried about, and I include myself in that, was that the Scottish pack would be bullied off the park, and they just weren't. I mean, you look at really hard, had a phenomenal debut. We haven't seen. I mean, Hamish Watson can only dream of a debut like that. He was yellow carded in his first time. I know it's his debut because he played against Wales, but his first start. But that's an absolute phenomenal start, and I think it poses the question, a lot of questions about tactics, and I'm not sure that Gregor Townsend knows what this Scotland team should be doing, and therefore I don't think the team knows what it should be doing.
Well, can I ask you guys? So we had the top try scorer in last year's Six Nations, and this year, Duhan's invisible. Like, he got what I would call a garbage time try against France this weekend. That's the only one he's gotten. Like, is there something wrong? Is that part of the Gregor Townsend thing? Is that part of the Stewart and Finn trying to do too much thing? Is it just a weak game plan to begin with? Like, where is he? He should be killing people. Like, that's his job.
I think
I'm worried that try saved him.
Yeah,
like we'd be talking exactly the same about him as we are about Finn and Hoggy, and to a lesser extent Ali Price. But somehow people are like, "Oh yeah, but he scored that try." But no, he's had 2.5, if not 3, by his standards, not very good games this time.
But he can't get the ball into his own hands. So, is it that he's playing badly, or he's just not getting the chances?
It's not coming through 12. The ball is not coming through 12. If you're playing to a Peloto at 12, the ball is not going to go wide. And it was evident this weekend. Every time he gets the ball, he will straighten up and he'll make yards, but we're not a crash ball 12 team. And Duhan then he's used to having that distributor where you can almost have Harris. Harris is kind of the skip man at 13, where he'll run the dummy line, you get Duhan on the ball. I would counter the point, actually. I think Duhan had a couple of very, very good breaks, but it was broken play. When Scotland are in structure just now, Duhan doesn't get the ball, and it is a flaw of the players around him. I don't lay the blame at him. I think you give him the ball, you see what he does. He breaks tackles, he goes meters. But in structure, we're just not using him.
I think the other thing as well for Duhan this season is that everyone knows who he is. It's the same thing with Scotland as a whole now. Everyone knows what's coming with Duhan.
Yeah.
And teams know what his weaknesses are, and they'll stick 2 men on him. Whereas in the chance to be one-on-one, he's going to win a one-on-one every day. But now they're sticking 2 men on him, and he's spilling the ball. And I think that's because they're targeting a weakness, Craig. And I think it's, as Alan McDonald says in the comments, it's with a difficult second album for Duhan after an Alliance hangover.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think, and with and this is no disrespect to Duhan, because I've been very, very vocal supporter of him, but he is a fairly one-dimensional player. He's got a lot of speed, and he's a big guy. And
he's got good looks too.
Oh yeah, he does. He looks like I've forgotten the
Johnny Bravo
character, Johnny Bravo. Yeah.
Yep.
So I think he's the Premiership haven't managed to get round him yet, because he's tearing it up at Worcester.
Yeah.
But I think at this moment in time, I think the international squads have realised that they know where to attack him, where he holds the ball, so they go for the rips now as well. He's spilling the ball a little bit more, but they're also putting 2 guys on him minimum every time. But that's down to the new attack coach. You've got Big Duhan. You're going to, you want to get the ball out to them, freak them out a little bit, and then pass it inside, or bring a George Horn line, straight through and take the ball quickly off them. But we're not doing that sort of thing at the moment.
I think it'd be really interesting just to look at like Duhan's meters per carry. Actually, like see if we just did a comparison last season versus this season. I think I genuinely I couldn't even tell you what that would look like because I just don't think he's carrying as much.
Right. This is a new thing for Scotland, right? But we've talked about how teams are putting at least 2 men on Duhan. People have always got at least one. You've got your man who's got him in the line, and at least another man tracking what Stuart Hogg's doing. Yep. In the forwards, there's always a couple of people looking to take Hamish Watson out of the game. Now, this isn't something that's happened to us before, but it is happening now where there are playmakers who are targeted with 2 or 3 bodies, and what that means is there's other players, other places on the park who have got an overlap because they've got the same amount of players as us. So if there's 2 players on Hoggy, there's 2 players on Duhan, there's at least 2 players trying to take.
Well, can I ask you guys that? So if they figured it out and the answer was put at least 2 people on Duhan, do you have confidence that this coaching team will be able to say, okay, now it's our turn to adjust, like find that, like you say, they've got the same number of people. Do you have confidence that Gregor Townsend and the new attack coach are going to be able to figure that out and counter?
I hope so. I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt, like I say, and saying it's not really happened to us before. So they need some time to sort of work out how you exploit it. But you're an international coach. You're Gregor Townsend's an alliance coach. So figure it out.
I think, and here's my thing with Gregor Townsend. I think Gregor Townsend is a phenomenal coach. And I think he's incredibly intelligent. But I sometimes wonder whether or not he's too intelligent for his own good. That he's got the Hogg thing of overthinking things.
Yep.
And overthinking things to such an extent that Scotland then look muddled. And we've talked about this in the past with the Tooney playbook, where John Barclay's talking about, he's got 300 different, options for what happens off one particular scenario. Like, I choose your own adventure. He writes his own choose your own adventure books, basically, as his playbooks. And it's, and that's great that he wants to, and I think he is sending teams out there with a little bit with the freedom to play now because Finn Russell's talked about that. But I do wonder how much I think Townsend sometimes guilty of overthinking things and maybe worrying a bit too much about what the opposition are doing and not enough about what Scotland should be doing.
It was telling to me quite early on in the Townsend era where I think it was the Georgia game down in Kilmarnock, and he talked about taking Georgia on at their strengths. And that to me, like, Scotland had every part of the game, Scotland were superior. That part of the game, it's like, yeah, I get that you want to try and nullify a strength, but that just, it struck me as a guy who, overcomplicating what should be a very, very simple game. We've got talented players who are talented in their own way. We've talked about the Scotland way of playing, but yet we're moving away from that, and we seem to be trying to react to what the opposition are doing instead of playing our game. And, yes, potentially losing by 7 points to France or losing by 3 points to Wales, but also potentially beating these teams. Like the display at the weekend, take aside the whole losing Chris Harris at halftime, obviously slanted the scoreboard significantly, but it shouldn't be the case that happens, because the coaching team need to have contingencies for a guy that probably can't be replaced in defence, but you need to be able to, like, we looked like an amateur side when he went off.
Yeah. I think it's the thing, is that there's a really good book, and we spoke to it's the guy that does this, is sports psychologist for Scotland, and his name escapes me for the moment.
Damien Hughes.
Damien Hughes, there we go. Wrote the Barcelona Way, and in the Barcelona Way, it talks about how Barcelona developed this big, turned into this big, massive club and all the things they put in place. And one of the things is Johan Cruyff, when he was in charge of Barcelona, had this whole mantra of, we don't worry about what our neighbour's doing. We don't worry about Real Madrid. And I get the sense that Scotland at the minute, Johnny, my kind of final point, I seem very worried about what the opposition are bringing, and not as worried about what they are going to do to win a game.
Yeah, and like where the teams are so evenly matched, like they are in the Six Nations, there does have to be an element of you are taking on the team that you're playing, and you're working out what they're good at, and you're kind of playing around it. But at the same time, you have to have confidence in your own style and your own system, and say we're going to go out and play our way. Like a few weeks ago, before the tournament started, and we were on the URC, we talked about Leinster, and Leinster do not care who they're playing against in the URC. Leinster know what they're doing, and they know how they're playing, and they do it, and most of the time they win. So like you are dealing with teams that are very close to you in skill, in personnel, and it's 5 really, really high quality teams. So you have to take it into account a little bit. But I think Scotland are got this problem, like you say, of focusing on the opponent's game plan and trying to play around it, whereas what they should be doing is playing Scotland's game plan with an eye on what the opponent's doing. I think we're going the wrong way around at the moment.
So I'll let David make his point now. I'll make my final point.
Oh, I was just curious, if you don't mind, can I throw a couple historical France versus Scotland numbers at you guys?
Go on then.
Oh, yes, great numbers.
So, in the 5 Nations tournament, right, France played Scotland on 69 different occasions, France winning 34, Scotland 33, with 2 matches drawn. It's hard to imagine a closer record than that, right? In those games, France scored 756 points, Scotland 819. Again, really, really close. But you might feel like you're in the Chiefs' second row right now because there's a big butt in front of you.
David, careful. We've had 69 in big butts, right?
I was trying really hard not to say nice.
He's literally going to switch off to go to Patreon. I mean, you could have, like, 2 minutes. Sorry, 2 minutes.
I like big butts. Come on. I can't lie.
You cannot lie. I can tell. But then, of course, in the Six Nations, France have played Scotland on 22 occasions. France winning, and I don't know if you guys want to guess how many do you think France have won out of those 22?
16?
17. Very close. Yeah. Scotland 5. No matches drawn. In those games, France have scored 504 points. Scotland's 330. And those numbers do include this past terrible, terrible weekend. So basically, these stats point to as soon as Italy joined, we started losing to France.
So it's Italy's fault.
Clearly. Get him out of there.
I would say once again, it's Matt Williams' fault, really.
Craig,
your final point.
Just one last thing, and we always look to Murrayfield and to the Scotland crowd, and everyone talks about how difficult Murrayfield is to come to, and how the Scotland team thrive on the crowd at Murrayfield. I'll tell you one thing: there were 20,000 Frenchmen there, or French fans there, and they were loud. We were where we were sitting. The Marseillais was played, and I thought it was a home game. It was loud, and I've got to say, obviously, I didn't hear much of Flower of Scotland because I was too busy greeting. But it was, standard. But it was absolutely and utterly. There was, really, the French were really behind their team, and I think maybe we need to have a word with Mark Dobson and just cut the French numbers down a little bit, and and stop giving them an advantage.
Yeah, it has been. To be fair, though, what has been they made that's right, because they came over here and they played us during COVID, and everyone spread COVID around Scotland.
Yeah,
that was it was a super spreader event for COVID when they came in.
That was the last game with fans, was it not?
Yeah, it was.
Yeah, it was the
last game with fans.
We were there. I was there. Yeah.
Because it got called off. The Wales game was the following weekend, and it got called off.
But I suppose it's the first. They're on the road now, and we're all, Anyway, look.
Can I give you guys one more funny stat?
You can give us one more funny stat, David.
Okay, I'm sorry to interrupt. I'm sorry to interject so much. So if you look at the last 20 meetings between France and Scotland, it's 14-6 in favor of France. No draws there. But 3 out of the 6 of Scotland's victories have all been in March. So if we had waited a week, if the schedule had fallen differently, this Saturday, would we be winning?
Yeah, you see, we just needed what we needed to do. Just needed to send Hamish Watson around kissing everybody in the squad to get everybody down with COVID, so that they could postpone it.
There we are. We've come up with a solution. We know what went wrong, and there we are. That's all we needed.
We'll end on this point. Dougie Lowe says the French gave him COVID 2 years ago. He was far too generous with his hip flask. If
I
only
can
we'd
imagine
known,
Dougie
Dougie. I take partial responsibility for that for on this podcast in the January of that year, saying it's just like the flu.
You did say that.
To be honest, it's not very well known that Dougie Lowe is generous. So
Look,
to be fair, Johnny, I've got a conversation to have with you about Dougie at some point, but yeah,
we'll save that for the Patreon podcast. Look, that's it for this week. Anyway, for the main podcast, if you're a Patreon, you can hang around if you're watching live, and we'll get on with the Patreon section of the podcast after this. If you are listening on audio and you're a patron, you can listen to the separate episode. If you are listening to the normal podcast, then we will be back next Wednesday to talk about there's some URC games this weekend, which there shouldn't be because of COVID. They're still playing them. And we'll have a bit of chat about the Italy game as well. But for the moment, it is goodbye from me and goodbye from Johnny, David, and Craig.
Bye all.
Well, thanks, everybody.
Cheers all.